One of the questions we get asked the most for organizations that call us in is to find out, is ISO right for my organization? They just want to know whether ISO certification applies to their organization. And by this, I mean ISO 9001 to actually start with. Does it apply to the organization? Now, based on our experience, I kind of find the normal ways in which people get involved in ISO. I'm going to kind of just list them down now, depending on the kind of organization. But the first thing to say is that if your organization sells business to business, then probably ISO 9001 will apply to you. If you're an organization that sells business to customer, to consumer, it might actually be a more tricky thing, except you are looking at ISO not so much from a commercial perspective, but for the improvement that it actually gives to your organization. Much of our client base is in the small to medium sized businesses, and that's talking of up to about 250 employees. And I'm just going to give you briefly the kind of journey that I see organizations undertake depending on their size. So sometimes you might get the micro business, okay? So this is a micro business that is now trying to move on to become a small business. And maybe because they're now trying to become a small business, a larger number of employees coming in, they're now having to deal with businesses that are requiring a lot more of them, and they suddenly realize that they need a bit more structure and systems for them to be able to move on to the next phase. Okay, so and they're requiring structure and systems to be able to step on to the next phase. And you have that happening with micro organizations. Or suddenly they begin to get the other people within their supply chain asking them to be able to demonstrate these competencies, whether they want to tender for products or things like that. They say, how are we able to trust you? Therefore, you need to go for some third-party certification, because it tells the people in their supply chain that they're an organization that has structure and that has systems, and therefore they can deliver the tender and the services consistently and to the quality that is expected. Now you have the category of companies in which we largely work with, the small to medium sized organizations that's leading up to about 250 employees. Many of them get into this when they are actually looking at growth, okay? And by growth, we're saying that they want to increase their market share, okay? Because increase market share, because when you want to start dealing with larger businesses and getting higher value clients, then they begin to expect many of the requirements that ISO actually represents to be in place for that particular organization. Do you have a quality policy in place? Do you have arrangements for taking care of staff? Do you have enough resources? Do you have ways of dealing with customer complaints? Do you have ways of dealing with incidences? Do you have a basic business continuity arrangement? Have you identified your processes? Are those processes in control? Now, ISO 9001 helps them to actually answer this question in one single thing. Many times for the big organizations, when they're doing supplier approvals, that's for the SMEs that are selling to the business organization, to the big business organizations, they send these supplier approval forms and they ask individual questions. Sometimes if you have ISO certification, that's just the end of it. You can assume so many other things that happen with that. And also for SMEs too, they sometimes also have this structure issue, being able to put a structure to their processes and to control their processes. But usually that's always the motivation that kind of gets them getting into the ISO process and for them to have good control. But then you now talk about the large businesses. And the large businesses usually do this simply for credibility, to add additional credibility potentially to their brand. And some of them actually seek the key thing about ISO to be able to instill a culture of continual improvement, okay? to instill a culture of continual improvement, because it forces you to have structures and processes in place where you have to consistently improve what you do. And then it also leads them to other things that ISO offers. So, for example, if they want to demonstrate that they're environmentally responsible, they can go for ISO 14001. If they want to demonstrate that they have good health and safety systems, they can go for ISO 45001. They can go for the information security standards and a lot more sector specific things that actually demonstrate that they're close to what is best practice across those functions. And finally, not to forget, you can have also charities, educational institutions, and a range of other organizations that might also choose to go the ISO route, mainly because it helps them to get a structured way of managing quality, okay, within their services and within the products that they may offer. So this gives you an idea of the kind of companies that it is. If you have any further questions in determining whether ISO will apply to your company, just contact us on admin@carisventures.co.uk.